Thank you, Matt. And I love the fact that Matt introduces me as an international speaker. I actually grew up in Kelowna. But thanks to Staples for inviting me to come and speak here in their Spotlight series. I think it's really cool what Staples did to take such a giant leap and move from like an old supply store to becoming what they call the Work, Learn, Grow company. I have a desk here that I sit at a few days a month, and I've done it since they opened back in September, October. And it's actually been amazing for my productivity. I have a desk at home too, but I get like 10,000 times the amount of stuff done here than I did at home. I'm also new to the idea of co-working spaces, so that's been kind of a new thing for me to, even though I worked in a big company where we had like an open plan office and things like that, having people that actually do completely different things around you is also really quite inspiring. But January is a month of setting goals and making resolutions, and that's what the Spotlight series at Staples is focused on this month. So they wanted me to talk about, setting goals and making resolutions. But in reality, I'm going to challenge the notion that making goals and chasing your goals is like the only route to eternal success and happiness. So I'm going to maybe talk a little bit about why chasing your goals might not be the best or the only way, or some of the potential pitfalls that will be out there. But first I have to make a couple of disclosures and do some introductions. And Matt keeps calling me internationals because I have kind of an accent now, which really upsets my mother. But despite that, I actually did grow up here, and I graduated from the old KSS in 1978, and then I left on what was supposed to be a gap year in Europe 4 days after I graduated from high school. I'll come back to that in a minute. But this is what I looked like on my departure day from Seattle Airport in 1978. So you can see I haven't changed a bit, right? So, but also in the more people. Hi, come on in.
Thank you.
No problem. It's the weather. We'll blame the weather, right? So also in the interest of honesty and transparency, the title for my talk today, Focus on the Start Line Instead of the Finish Line, is not something I made up. It's actually, I poached it from the first American that won an Olympic gold medal in whitewater kayaking. He won it at the Barcelona Olympics in 1992, and his name is Joe Jacobi, and we met him in Washington, D.C. in just a couple of years ago, I guess. So from there, I'll give you just a bit of an introduction to who I am and why I have this accent. As mentioned, I graduated from KSS in 1978. I went to spend a year in Europe, but it actually took me 4 decades to get back. We came back in 2018, and it was exactly 40 years and a week since I'd left. I'm a university dropout. I studied at a university in Norway for pretty much forever because it was free to go to university. There was no tuition. So as long as I could show up at the police department every 6 months with proof that I had earned 20 credits, I could get my visa extended. And the credits didn't actually have to build towards anything. So I just, whatever seemed interesting at the time, I signed up for it. I did get up to my master's thesis in psychology, but I didn't finish it. I dropped out because they wanted me to spend 4 more years doing something I really didn't want to do. So I said, see ya. After that, I asked myself, well, what do you really want to do? I didn't want to be a psychologist. I didn't obviously want to go into research because I didn't want to spend 4 years getting my thesis done. So I decided I wanted to work in travel, and I couldn't get a job. I was 27 years old. I had no background to get into the travel industry. Nobody wanted to hire me. And even the job I got, I went for this job because it was security guard in a hotel that was owned by an airline. And I thought, okay, how hard can that be? I went for the interview, and the guy said, well, he looks at my resume and he says, you're too old and you're too educated. And I needed a job, so I started to defend myself and tell him how great of an employee I'd be. And he looked at me and said, you have way too many opinions. And so there I was. But luckily for me, there was only one other applicant for the job, and he withdrew his application. And that was pretty much, well, it was the only job I ever applied for in that company. I stayed with the company at the time. They were a Scandinavian subsidiary, a little small hotel company. When I left 31 years later, we were one of the 10 largest companies in the world. And I just kind of floated up and ended my career as Vice President Global Safety and Security. I was awarded a Carlson Fellow when Carlson owned the company. We went through a lot of mergers and acquisitions along the way. I was also selected as the #1 global influencer in the security executive category in 2018, which from an organization called IFSEC. But the judges for that were like the chief security officer from Microsoft and some financial institutions. And I didn't even know I was nominated, so that was pretty cool. We moved here in 2018 and set up the Always Care Consulting Company, basically as kind of a way for us to share our life's experiences. Kirsten was an entrepreneur in Copenhagen and really started the wellness boom. She's a massage therapist, but she had a clinic, but she also went into big companies and said, hey, this could be a big benefit for your employees. And that became a huge benefit in the 90s and early 2000s in Denmark. And for my part, I can share my stories about everything that happened to me during my big, long career with the hotel company. And then recently, a couple of friends and I, former counterparts, the head of global security for Intercontinental Hotels and Hyatt Hotels, we were talking on the phone and said, you know, we're all getting old, but we're not that old. So we still felt we could contribute. So we set up this company together with an expert in cybercrime, another one in business resiliency, to try to help the hotel industry build some bridges between franchises and hotel companies, between the industry and government sector. So we actually launched our website last week, but we had to force our start because we got some engagement from the UN and from a couple of other global organizations. So we had to kind of kickstart ourselves. So that's basically my 4-decade gap year. So thanks, everybody. And we'll see what we come back to. I want to make this interactive, so we'll have a couple of breaks along the way where we'll have discussion back and forth, and you can challenge some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about. And I'm going to start by saying this, that goal-oriented success is a myth, or if not completely a myth, it's got some potential pitfalls. Again, it's not me making this up, but it was funny because when we moved here, my parents had just moved out of their house and into a retirement home, and so they dragged us down to this storage room where they put all my stuff that had been lying around for 40 years waiting for me to come back from my gap year. And we went through all that, and I don't know, it's probably only a couple of months ago, we were flipping through something, and I found this little piece of paper that I'd written when I was probably 12 years old. And the backstory is that back in the early 70s, when every night we would have dinner together as a family, and we'd all be talking away, but at 5 to 6 we all had to shut up, because on the radio there was a little talk by a guy called Earl Nightingale. And Earl Nightingale was, you know, like today he'd be a podcaster or write self-help books or something like that. He did write books as well. But it was all about, you have to have a goal, and you have to write it down, and it has to be super specific, and you have to have a time frame. And if you just do that and you reach your goal, you'll be so successful and so happy that, you know, nothing else will matter. And so we're flipping through this stuff, and I found my little piece of paper that I cut out probably from his book, and it said, this is my goal. My goal was that I was going to be the on-air broadcaster for the Kelowna Buckaroos hockey team, which was like back way before the Rockets existed. And I was going to do that by the time I was like 20 years old, and that was going to be my whole career. And I didn't become that. I didn't do that. I didn't reach that goal. And then I read this study that came out of Harvard, I think came out in about 2009, and it was called Goals Gone Wild. And it was like these researchers at Harvard went out and they looked at everything is about goal-oriented success. You have to have goals. They have to be specific. They have to be on a time frame. And then they started to look at, is that true? Does it actually hold up when you actually test it out and look at stuff? And they found some stuff that it's not actually true always. And in a lot of cases, it causes problems that you don't really foresee at all. One of the things in their study was, back when Sears existed, they had an automotive department. And they decided they would give bonuses to their mechanics in the automotive department if they reached certain targets in certain time frames. But what they found out down the road was that the mechanics started charging more for doing less. They started making repairs that didn't need to be made. So they were focused so much on reaching their targets that they were doing a lot of unethical stuff. And so then they looked at other stuff. They found Enron. Enron was completely focused on revenue. They were like putting revenue that they calculated would come in 3, 4, 5 years. They're putting it on the books today because, hey, we're growing so fast. Let's just put it in now because then we reach our targets faster. We get bigger bonuses. Everything goes way better. We know what happened to Enron. They took down themselves. They took down a global accounting company, and they took away a lot of really innocent, hardworking people's pensions, right? And those people are probably still digging themselves out. Another example they used was Ford. Ford had this great idea in the late 60s that we can build a car that will weigh less than 2,000 pounds and cost less than $2,000, and we'll do this by such and such a date. And so they invented the Ford Pinto. Problem was that the Ford Pinto had a susceptibility to burst into flames in accidents. And along the way, the designers actually figured this out, that, hey, we should be testing for that, but they didn't. Because if they'd done that, they wouldn't reach their target within the time frame. The car might have to weigh more, and it might have to cost more than $2,000. So they actually calculated, okay, what are all the lawsuits that come out of these fiery car crashes going to cost us? And they figured out that would cost them less than building a car. More than 50 people died in Ford Pinto fiery crashes that were attributed to the design fault, and who knows how many got injured by it. And so those are just a few of the examples that they gave in this report that, hey, if you become super specifically focused on super specific targets, you might be missing out on something that could cost you down the line, right? And so if we look at today, anybody have an example of something similar that's gone on recently that again would be, if they redid this report today, it would probably be front and center of one of their examples?
I have a diesel Golf.
You have a diesel Golf? Yeah, exactly. Volkswagen and faking the... It's costing them a fortune now, for sure. Yeah. Raymond?
In all three of those examples, it wasn't necessarily the goal that got in the way, it was the greed to achieve the goal. And I think
Yeah.
if you look at the underlying intention on there was that their greed became more important than the rationale. And in Ford's case, Enron's case, and you see it now in the GasLink pipeline, where they're so consumed by getting the pipeline built that they're ignoring some of the red flags that are actually appearing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and we'll come back to that in a sec. That's a really good point about why does this actually happen? Is it the goal's fault, or is it something else that gets in the way? Any other examples from today? My example is like Boeing, the 737 MAX, right? The emails are starting to come out now that the engineers are saying, hey, we're run by a company that's, run by clowns and they're supervised by monkeys, right? And so they knew that we have issues here. We should be doing things that we're not doing, but, we got to get this out to market. So let's go. Okay, here's some of the examples, and Raymond touched on it. It's not the goal's fault. It's how do we look at it, and what gets in the way. So, and what the study said was that if you make your goal too specific, too narrow, it becomes a potential problem, because you, in the interest of greed or whatever's driving you to reach that goal, you're overlooking stuff. So the Ford Pinto example is a good one at that. I once had a boss that said, I know you got a lot on your plate, just do the stuff you like. Don't worry about the other stuff. He was in HR, I was in security. I mean, for me, that's not really an option, right? If I only did the stuff I liked, what could have gone wrong, right? So, time frames, that, if it needs to be done by then, what kind of problems can that challenge you with? Nobody wants to go to their boss and say, it's not going to be this year, it's going to be like in 2 years. Ain't going to happen, right? Or they fear that they won't be allowed to do that. So they're like, yeah, boss, we'll get it done. Stretch goals. They change people's risk perception. In the study, they used an example of a football quarterback, and he was incentivized. He threw too many interceptions. So they gave him an incentive. Hey, if you throw fewer interceptions, we'll give you a bigger bonus. You know how he threw fewer interceptions? He stopped throwing passes, right? So he gets his bonus. Great for him, not so good for the team, right? So, and those stretch goals, they lead to unethical behavior. It's like a win at all cost mentality. Do what you need to do, just get it done, right? And so people, they turn away from what they know is right, what they know is ethical, and they're like, let's do this instead. There's a company called Microscribe, and interesting for a lot of these companies that you mentioned, like Enron and Microscribe and a couple of the others that are mentioned in the report, the interesting thing is they don't exist anymore, right? So they probably dug their own grave by the way they were behaving. Microscribe used to produce hard drives and parts to computers, and so they had these huge goals on shipping. Just get this out faster, the faster the better. And the shipping goals were actually so demanding that they couldn't produce hard drives fast enough. So the people started sending bricks to their customers instead of hard drives, because then they were meeting their shipping targets. Obviously that company doesn't exist anymore. In hotels, when we started loyalty programs, we incentivized the front desk staff to sign up as many new members as they could. And the new members would get sign-in bonuses. You get like 100,000 free miles or 50,000 free miles or whatever. It didn't take very long before the front desk staff, when they had a few quiet moments, they'd start flipping through the phone book and signing up every name in the phone book. They'd attribute those names to email addresses that the employees controlled themselves. So employees were getting all the signing bonuses, and all these fake accounts were being set up. It's still a huge problem today in all kinds of loyalty programs where they incentivize staff to get as many members as you can. And I always question, how can the measurement for success of a loyalty program be the number of members? It doesn't say anything about their loyalty. So, but it's easy for the accountants to count and the salespeople to count, and everybody thinks it's great. And so specific goals also lead to higher risk behavior and gambling. People take a chance, like they did with the Pinto, they did with the 737 MAX, like they're doing with a lot of stuff. It's better to take the chance because then we get our bonus. And the same thing on time frames. If you have a salesperson and you have a sales target, by the end of this month, you have to sell this many units. Well, what incentivizes that person if they sell all those units the first week? Do they go golfing for the other 3 weeks, or are they incentivized to sell more? How do you do that? Or do you just scale up and say, hey, bigger bonus if you sell even more? But where is the real motivation, incentivization to those people to actually just do the right thing, which is their job? So this is a picture of the lobby in one of our hotels in Africa for the company I used to work for. And we had this huge mission to open as many hotels in Africa as we could in as short a period of time as we could. It was like a new country, a new city, a new capital. We wanted to be everywhere within a really short time frame. And I started to think back when I was a kid, at night when I couldn't sleep, I just turned the dial. I wasn't really interested in music. I just flipped the dial around on my little transistor radio until I heard something interesting. And I started to listen to newscasts in English from Radio Moscow World Service. And this was during the Vietnam War and stuff. And I'm listening to them talk about this war. And it took me a while before I understood it was the same war that we were seeing news on the nightly news on TV here. It was just coming at it from a different angle. And so when we had about the Vietnam War in social studies, I put my hand up and asked the question, but because we were the good guys, right? But I put my hand up and said, well, what if we're the bad guys? And I told about these newscasts I was hearing at night. Got sent down to the principal's office because, we might have a communist in the class. But I thought back to that when we had our mission to open all these hotels in Africa, which super good, right? But my question was, how are we going to be perceived there? So I wrote a memo to our senior leadership team, and I said, well, what if we're the bad guys? What if the local people perceive us to be bad people coming in to exploit the low-cost labor, to make huge profit margins that we export from the country, take back to ourselves, and we can all pat each other on the back, we all get our big bonuses. So my question is, are we going to go in as good guys trying to help an emerging market emerge? Are we going in as bad guys just trying to exploit this bigger profit margin we can get? Next day, 7 a.m., CEO walks into my office, and I figure, okay, 25 years or however long I've been with the company at the time, that was a good run. But he just put his hand out and shook mine, and he said, you're the only person in the company that could write something like that and send it to the executive committee and ask that question. He said, we haven't asked ourselves that question. We should have asked ourselves that question. Thank you very much. Now, I'd love to say that the whole policy change and everything we didn't actually change that much, but it did plant a little seed of thought in their heads of how are we going to go into these markets, right? I was thinking of it in my role that, if you don't have the locals on board, if they don't understand that we're doing this as much for them as for us, that we're actually trying to be good guys, we could have all kinds of problems. Labor disputes, strikes, blackmailing, or even physically targeting our expat staff. You don't know, right? So we need to have everybody on side. So the conclusion of the Harvard study was pretty much, goals should only be slightly implicating the self. They should be about something outside of you. Because like Raymond mentioned, greed, big thing, right? Easy to get sucked into. They should only be moderately important. They shouldn't be the be-all and end-all of your business or yourself or whatever. They should be fairly easy. So don't stretch yourself into, or make a goal that stretches you into cheating or doing something that helps you reach your goal, but that's not actually a good thing. And they shouldn't be really focused on material or financial gain. So we'll take a little survey here, and what do you think? Does this make sense, or do you still think, hey, I need to have my specific goals. It's the only way I can measure, my success or whether my business is doing well. What do you think? Yeah?
I think I've got, high schoolers who are just coming out of school. They don't really know what they want to be when they grow up.
Yeah.
And I'm finding myself at that same situation right now. And, I think if you're too specific, when you really don't know what all the options are, you could be, pigeonholing yourself to fail. Whereas if you maybe have a goal that's sort of specific in a general way and sort of start the journey, then you could be open to different avenues as they arise, because you never know when an opportunity fit for you is going to come along.
Absolutely. Yeah. Any other comments? Yep.
I really appreciate what you said there, and it was kind of said quickly, which was, if I understood what you were saying, and to me, but I would
It's my
add to
accent.
this,
Yeah.
was the goal should always be filtered through doing the right thing.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking as you were looking at examples, they were talking like recently the Houston Astros found to be cheating to win the World Series.
Mm-hmm.
And the goal, of course, is to win the World Series, and is of course to be the best players. But if it was always filtered through doing the right thing, their victory's so
Yeah.
who cares? But otherwise, if it just put that one other filter through, perhaps they wouldn't have resorted to that.
Yeah. I think if I was a Houston Astros part of their organization and I had the ring, I'd send it back because you didn't get it fairly. Yeah.
And they'll never know if they could have won it legitimately.
Exactly.
They're
Yeah.
wrong
Yeah.
themselves.
And in college, they strip away their championships if they're caught cheating.
Yeah.
But not in the pros.
No. And even Major League Baseball has done more than some other organizations where they have similar kinds of issues. They've at least fired a few people and fined a few people and gone after the top of the organization and not necessarily the people that were actually doing the cheating. But yeah, a good friend of mine, he has a saying that he says he learned from an old bootlegger, and his philosophy was nobody can give you permission to do the wrong thing, and nobody needs to give you permission to do the right thing. And that's kind of where I really started to pull that into my own way of being as well. It's like, you have to think, not is this going to get us to where we want to be, but is this actually the right thing to be doing? Yeah.
I also think about the goal itself. Like when I finished work and I retired, I was in a technical field and I always wanted to have a degree. I always thought that was going to be like so cool if you could go and get one. And I started at the college and I took a few courses and I realized, oh, it's actually not about the degree. It's actually about what you want to learn.
Exactly.
And so, but that was why would that be my goal? But now my goal is just learning. So.
And that's the only way it should be. When I dropped out of university, my mentor was like completely upset. He's like, "But you're this close, I'll pay you. You can work for me as an assistant, a lecturer, and you'll get your degree." And I'm like, "Hey, I was never here to get a piece of paper I could hang on my wall. I was only here to learn." I said, "Look at the subjects I studied. It's not like towards this. It's like this, that, wherever, because I wanted to learn those things at the time." Okay, so there is always an exception to the rule. And my younger brother, when he was 11 years old, he saw an interview with Steven Spielberg on TV. And right away afterwards, he went to my mom and he said, "Mom, when I grow up, I'm gonna make movies." And he didn't wait until he grew up. He was like, he took my dad's Super 8 camera and started filming and doing all kinds of stuff. And now he's this award-winning cinematographer who has a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Canadian Society of Cinematography. He's worked on some big productions right now. He's in Prague working on a huge production for a big global streaming service. We're still not allowed to say what it is because they have a non-disclosure agreement, even though all the actors are all over their social media saying what they're working on. But at the end of the day, okay, he went after his goal. He got it. He's been super successful. But a little bit to the points that have been coming out here and the points that were mentioned in the study, his goal wasn't super specific. It wasn't attached to financial gain or time frame or anything like that. It was pretty vague. It was like, I'm going to make movies. He didn't say what kind of movies or when or how or that he was going to be this successful before he turned 30 or 40 or whatever. He just, this is what I want to do. And that's what he's done pretty much his whole life and is still doing now. And that brings me over to the guy who gave me the title for the presentation today. And I actually asked him, "Joe, is it okay?" And he's like, yeah, whatever, let me know if you need anything from me. But the way I met Joe was I read something he wrote on LinkedIn, and I shared it. And like 10 minutes later, I get this connection request. And he says, thanks for the kind share today. Thought it might be good to connect here. With gratitude, Joe. And I'm like, holy cow. An Olympic gold medalist wants to connect with me just because I shared one of his posts. And his post was, when you're stuck, when you're frustrated, reach out to one person. And it was a whole list of things that had changed or helped or contributed to him and his life when he just sent one email or one note to one person over a long period of time. Every time he bumped into a wall, he'd send an email out or give a call to somebody he knew. And he listed up all these things that had helped him. And Joe looks at life as if it's a river. I mean, his gold medal is whitewater kayaking, right? So everything he talks about is usually some kind of metaphor with a river. That there's rapids, there's calm areas, there's rocks, there's obstructions, there's sometimes you're going with the flow, sometimes you're paddling against the stream. And he relates everything in life to that. And so the first time we met him, it was pretty funny because, half funny, half tragic. We used to spend the week before American Thanksgiving in Washington, D.C. every year because there was briefings at the State Department that I attended. Everybody in my contact network was there. And so this week was packed full of meetings. And in 2017, it was so full of meetings that the hotel security working group I was part of, we had to have our meeting on Sunday. And so we'd planned the whole week to be in DC. I think we probably planned the week after to take vacation time and stuff like that. And then just before we left, my boss says, well, you can't spend all that time there because we were going through an ownership change and there's a super important meeting, you have to be there, it's on Tuesday. And so there goes the whole week, right? So we had to rebook, fly home Monday night back to Brussels. And so sitting around the hotel on Monday, and I noticed that Joe, who actually lives in Spain, he's in DC. That's where his family came from. So I sent him a note and I said, hey, it'd be funny if we bumped into each other. We're leaving tonight, but it'd be funny if we bumped into each other. Washington, D.C. is not that big, right? And right away he emailed me back, said, well, where are you? We can meet for lunch. So we met him for lunch. He came down, and very appropriately, the place we met him for lunch was called the River Inn. It's a hotel we always stayed at in D.C. But Joe writes a blog. It's called Sunday Morning Joe. You can find it on joejacobi.com. But I've followed that blog all the time. It's usually really short, like 2-3 minute read. But more often than not, there's like a little nugget of something I think, wow, that's something I want to remember and try to use. But here's a few of the things that he believes in, he really focuses his whole life on. And make no mistake, Joe's a competitor. He runs marathons. He's a performance coach. He coaches some of the top whitewater kayaking people in the world from all kinds of different countries. So he's still super focused on being the best possible kayaker or person or whatever that you can be. But he doesn't finish on getting there. He focuses on the start line. He's like, because when you cross the finish line, you're kind of done. It is what it is, right? It might be, if you didn't get the time you wanted, it's not about going back and paddling harder because you can't go back. You already crossed the finish line. But from the start line, you always have the opportunity every step of the way to make a little course correction, to try to do something a little bit better, whatever, all the way down. And so what he looks at, he says a line's a line, right? And so if every line has two sides, there's crossing it to finish, or there's crossing it to get to the other side to start. And that's the way he kind of focuses. So he kind of epitomizes the saying that life's a journey, not a destination, but he uses that like every single day. And he says, every day, every moment is an opportunity to take a small step, or make a small step, or create a small step, do something. The goals can be there in the distance, He had the goal he wanted to run the Boston Marathon, but that wasn't what he focused his whole life on. And he says, you know, adding these to your daily routine can really help you avoid you letting other things and other distractions get in your way. And so we have to remember Joe's the one with the gold medal, right? So when he says these are important compared to, you know, your paddling technique or running faster or doing something, it's like, really? It sounds a little bit counterintuitive, right? But, and it is. But the way he looks at it and is, you know, the glittering gold medal is like a shiny object that we all want to have, right? We'd all love to have one. He has one. But we're not magpies. So we don't necessarily want to run around chasing shiny objects, right? And so his counterintuitive approach is what actually helped him get his gold medal, right? Stepping back. He says, if you cross the finish line and didn't achieve your goal, the solution isn't to go out and paddle harder. Starting over can mean stepping away. Pull yourself back a little bit. Think, you know, maybe you should paddle on really, really calm water and get the feel for the boat, for the river, for everything, and become better and better at that. So it's, because then you can, when you're back on the course, it's easier. We have more mastery of what you have than trying to master it in an uncontrollable situation. And so he looks at things like this to help him improve his focus. And things like mastery comes slowly. Simple steps, take them often. You become better and better and better at stuff until you're suddenly performing way better than you ever thought you could. And the thing about gratitude, he's so much about gratitude. Being thankful for what you have and not focusing so much on what you don't have. And he hears so many, he trains tons of young athletes, right? And they're all like, oh, I need a newer boat. I need a faster boat. I need a better this, a better that. And suddenly he's like, no. You need to be better at what you need to be better at. It's not about the boat. It's not about your shoes. It's not about your financing. It's not about all that stuff. It's about doing what you can with what you have available today. So this is a picture of a sunset in Hawaii so we can step back and reflect a little bit. And so I just want to recap a little bit. We talked a little bit about the danger and the potential pitfalls of focusing completely on really specific goals and all the little things that can get in the way and cause us to veer off track and do silly things. And then we talked a little bit about Joe and the way he focuses on not getting there, but getting better every step of the way to wherever it is you're headed. And when you get there, where are you going to go from there, right? So he's always about moving forward, getting better, being better, doing better. So then the final little section here, I want to share some of my own personal experiences with goals. And basically, I never accomplished any of my big goals that I actually formulated in my head or wrote down or planned out. Never happened. So I told you about my Earl Nightingale goal, wrote that down. Hey, if I would have become the Kelowna Buckaroos broadcaster, I would have been out of a job by 1983 when they left town, right? So, and you know, I'm never going to be Reagan Rand. I could never get that excited about pretty much anything. I could never become a psychological or any other kind of researcher, because when my mentor said, hey, you're onto something good here, and I mean, talk about narrow and focused, we were looking at engineering students' study habits. What study habit gives the best grade, right? And we gathered data for a whole year on a class of engineering students to find out how did they study, how much did they study, were they right-handed, left-handed, did they drink, did they smoke weed, did they do this, that, or the other. A million different variables, right? At the end of the year, there was only one thing that statistically always gave them better grades. Any guesses to what it was? Sorry? Studying, yeah, but we were looking at how did they study. So what part of studying do you think? regular, it was time. The more you study, the better your grades, right? And so my mentor was a statistician, and he's like, there's no way you can write a thesis that is that obvious, right? Study hard, study long, study often, get good grades, right? Really? Everybody's mom already told them that. And so being a statistician, he's looking at all this data and he says, oh, there's something, a little thing there, a little thing there. It's not significant yet. But you know, if we took a class at their first year of engineering and followed them for all 4 years, I think we could find something. I'm like, you're crazy, right? There's no way I'm going to do this for 4 years. And so I quit. And then I get into this big company, right? We were owned by an airline. We got owned by other bigger, even more companies. And companies, corporations, they have these plans for you, right? We had like the 5 steps to become a leader program. And to get through all these things and become like what they want you to become, you have to take all these courses that they set up for you. And some of them were team building courses. So the very first team building course they sent me on, we had to do like a personality test at the start. And so after the first coffee break, the coach or trainer or whatever she was, she looked at everybody's personality traits. And she came to me and she said, you know, when I was being certified to lead these courses, your profile was one that they warned us against. You're a cold fish. You could disrupt this whole course. So, and because she was quite new in the role, she's like, I'd be really more comfortable if you didn't come back after lunch. And so that was the first team building course I got kicked out of. It actually took me about 28 years before I actually completed a whole team building course without getting sent home. But one of the other ones I got kicked out of was like a 3-day course. And a lot of the exercises were designed to show that teams perform better than individuals. And so you get the, the course where, or the exercise where you're on a boat, capsizes, you're allowed to take this many things onto a remote island. What do you take? And then they give you a score. What's the smart stuff to take? Unfortunately for me, my individual scores were always better than my team scores. And so the coach asked me, so, well, why? Why don't you convince your team to take the stuff you want to take with you? And I'm like, really? It's not, I'm not going to be on a boat that capsizes with these people and have to decide. I mean, it's not what it's about. So you can leave. Then we did a negotiations course, and it was about, you'd get a problem, there'd be 2 teams. They each had to defend one side of the problem in this negotiation to see what you ended up with. And my team, we just won every negotiation so fast, so hands down, so whatever. And the coach was super impressed. And he said, do you guys have a secret? And I said, yes, we do. And he said, well, what's your secret? And I said, well, everyone, they put their paper on a desk in front of them with what's non-negotiable, what's negotiable, what their end game is. And I can read upside down, so I'm just reading what they want, and then we're going after that. So it's pretty easy when you know what the other side wants. Pretty easy to win a negotiation. Well, that's cheating, you're out. And I'm like, well, what do you think happens in real life? If we don't teach these people not to give away their stuff to other people, how are they going to do when they get out in the real world and start negotiating with real people? Still didn't help, got me kicked out. But still, at the end of the day, even though I never was able to do all these steps to leadership or whatever, I basically went from the basement, where I started as a security guard, to the boardroom, where I had to give and defend my department's challenges, budgets, everything, to the board of a global company. So how do you get there? Oh, these 2 people helped me a lot. Can anybody name both of them? Well, we got Richard Branson. That's kind of on the book cover there. So which one's he? He's the one on the right. Okay, good. Anybody know who the guy on the left is? The guy on the left is Adam Grant. And actually, when I was putting this presentation together, I thought, I wonder if Adam Grant and Richard Branson, both of them kind of influenced me a lot. I wonder if they ever actually did anything together or whatever. And first thing that popped up was this YouTube video where Adam Grant actually interviews Richard Branson. Adam Grant was the youngest ever tenured professor at Wharton Business School in Pennsylvania, which is kind of the upper echelon of business schools in the US. And it's funny because when Adam Grant comes onto the stage at the start of this video, he's wearing a tie. Richard Branson looks at him and says, "Hey, I've been trying to get people to stop wearing ties for 50 years. And he walks over and cuts the tie. It is probably scripted and all that, but he walks over and cuts his tie off and pulls it off. But Adam Grant wrote a book called Give and Take, which has also influenced me quite a bit. Richard Branson, he has a saying that if someone offers you a good opportunity and you're not sure if you can do it, say yes and figure it out, right? And so that's kind of how my career went. You know, I started in a role, well, when I went for my interview at the 5-star hotel, I'd never been in a 5-star hotel before. I couldn't even force myself to walk in the front door of that hotel. I was so intimidated by a world that was just way outside anything I'd ever experienced. And so I went in a side entrance when I went up for my interview. And I've never actually forgotten that feeling, but along the way, okay, you get a job, you don't know anything about it, right? So what do? You figure it out. But how do you figure it out? You ask other people. You reach out. For me, it was learning from my boss, learning from my colleagues, learning about everything else that went on in the hotel, how the hotel fit together. Because I'm thinking, I'm here to kind of protect and support that. I need to know what it is that they're doing. So I need to know what I'm supposed to be protecting and how I can support them. When I was promoted to manager, same thing. I'm not a security guy. I have no security background. And so I needed to have people on my team that actually knew about security. So all my team members had qualities and capabilities that I just didn't have. But it was super important for me that they had it and that I could learn from them so I could back them up when we needed to go to the management and say, we need this or that. When my role became global, same thing. You know, here I am, no security background, and suddenly you're like global head of security for 1,500 hotels. How am I going to do this? I did the same thing. I reached out to other people that were in the same role as me and tried to ask, so when your companies stay in our hotels, when your employees stay in our hotels, what do you need? What do you expect? What should we be providing? I was looking at my role always as kind of a service role, serving the other members of the hotel, serving the other members of people on my team that I knew had the capabilities, and then serving our clients on a global scale, serving governments. That's how, you know, recently I was invited to the UN to address the Security Council Counterterrorism Committee. I've never been in the military. I'm not like a counterterrorism expert, but I do know a lot about how hotels work and building bridges between what we do and what the counterterrorism people need us to be looking at, to be doing. So building bridges, doing stuff like that. So in short, instead of trying to pretend or fake or learn everything so you're better than everyone else, it's like find out who's better than you, reach out to them, and see how you can work together. And that's kind of where Adam Grant comes in. And without actually knowing it, because I don't know when his book came out, probably 5, 6 years ago, his first book called Give and Take, these three things were subconsciously forming themselves in my mind, and now we've used them as the motto for the Always Care Consulting Company. But it's all about, so the communicate part is the outreach, going out to people and say, you know, what do we have in common? What are our common challenges? What are our common objectives? You know, where can we find some common ground? And then the collaborate part is, okay, what do we each bring to the table that's different, that will help us with our common challenges and objectives? And then the last one is really, for me, the most important one, the contribute part. So it's not about going into something to see what you can get from it, because then it becomes so one-sided that people will shun you and push you away because, hey, he's only here for, and I've seen a lot in our company and in organizations that where you meet new members and they're like, I don't think I'm going to continue here because I don't see how this is going to help my business. So they're there because they want to get something. And that's not usually the best way. But if you go in and say, how can I contribute to the overall success of whatever our common ground is and our collaboration is, it's going to be better for everyone. And better for everyone is always just better. So Adam Grant's book, Give and Take, if you haven't read it, recommended reading. So summing up, the way I think about it and the way I view things is that success isn't about reaching your goals or achieving your goals. Because when you get there, it ain't over, right? There's going to be something else. You can always do something else. So it's more about doing the right thing and doing things right. Trying to be better at what you do, but be a better person while you're doing it. Trying to be better one small step at a time. So it's not about taking these huge giant leaps and look how fantastically better I became. No, just every single day you have an opportunity to do something a little bit better than you did before. When you stop focusing blindly on goals, you also find opportunities you had no idea that were there. When I was really searching for a job, I wanted to work in travel, and for me that was kind of airports and airlines. That was pretty much the narrow focus of my search. Hotels didn't factor into it at all. Security certainly didn't factor into it. But by the time I was getting desperate, I finally opened up to the chance that, hey, this hotel is owned by an airline. It's a security guard job. How hard can that be? Be a foot in the door at the airline, and then, down the road I'll be able to apply internally for real airline or airport jobs. But, by probably the end of the first weekend I was working there, this whole new world had opened up for me that I had no idea existed, that I was pretty much, I figured I'd be standing in that lobby the rest of my life. It was so interesting. My psychology background was just getting ramped up to all this stuff. They never taught you that in school, but you saw stuff and experienced things, good and bad, that, holy, this is where I'm supposed to be. So if I had stuck to my narrow-minded focus of, driving a baggage cart or something like that at an airport, I never would have had the opportunities that I had. And so when you're banging your head against a brick wall, like you can't get to where you want to go, you're struggling to do the things that you want to do, it's like take a page out of Joe Jacobi's book, step back, stop, think, meditate, be thankful for whatever it is you're banging your head against, because at least that's something. But think about it. And that's where he was when he wrote his post, the one that connected us. When you're stuck, reach out to one person. Because he was super frustrated at the time. And he's thinking, what am I going to do? And then he started to think, well, I contacted that guy, I contacted this over the past 3, 4, 5 years, and then he made this huge long list of all these times he'd actually just talked to somebody or reached out to somebody about something, and how that had contributed to moving him along to where he wanted to get. And so my final note is that to take another page from his notebook, when you reach a milestone, achieve a goal, or cross a finish line, look at it as a start line that provides an opportunity to move on, do better, and achieve more. So thanks all for coming out today, and if there's questions or anybody wants to chat, I'm here. Yep. Thank you very much.